Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that smells like smoke, sounds like coughing, and feels like the end of everything you've ever known. The year is 1348, the Black Death has just arrived in your town, and you poor soul, are going to try and survive it. You won't like it. You'll wish you hadn't. But for some reason, you will. The sun has barely crept above the horizon, but already the streets are oddly still. No barking dogs. No clatter of carts. Only the low, mournful clang of a church bell somewhere in the fog. A death bell. Again. That's the third this morning. You're not even out of bed yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, leave a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know who's drifting off with us. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie on your lumpy straw mattress in the one-room wooden hovel you share with 5 family members. One of them is coughing in the corner. You try not to look. You don't want to know who it is. Outside, the smell of burnt rosemary and boiling vinegar fills the air, an attempt by someone, somewhere, to purify the bad air they think is bringing death. Miasma, they call it. You don't know that it's actually fleas hitching rides on rats. No one does. The plague has no name here, only dread. By noon, 2 carts have passed your door, each pulled by a gaunt horse and stacked high with bodies. A man walks beside them ringing a handbell and calling, "Bring out your dead." He sounds bored. This is just how mornings are now. You step outside to collect water from the well, careful not to breathe too deeply. Everyone believes the air itself is sick. You tie a piece of scented cloth around your nose, lavender stuffed if you're lucky, garlic if you're not. Some people press oranges to their faces. You haven't seen an orange in weeks. Down the street, someone is lighting bundles of juniper and tossing them into the wind. It keeps the plague out, he insists. He's also shouting at children to stay indoors. None of them listen. Back at home, you try to eat. There's a crust of black bread, hard as slate. Someone traded a rotten onion for it. You chew it slowly, ignoring the tiny maggots. You're grateful. Your stomach doesn't argue. That coughing from earlier? It's worse now. It's your little brother. His neck is swollen, face blotchy. You touch his forehead, it's blazing hot. He looks up at you with hollow eyes. You feel a cold weight settle in your stomach, and it isn't hunger. You've seen this before. Everyone has. Just last week, the baker's wife had the same swelling, what the priests call God's tokens. She was dead in 2 days. They buried her in her apron. The baker didn't even say a prayer. Just stared. You try to comfort your brother, holding his hand as he shivers. You hum the old lullaby your mother used to sing before she passed. It feels strange, humming to someone older than you. He coughs red into his sleeve. That's when you start thinking about the town itself. About how it used to be. The square where children played. The market with the scent of apples and fish and yeast. The gossiping women. The cheerful scolding of old men. It's all faded, like a half-remembered dream. Now, the only gatherings are funerals. And even those are rushed. Historians still argue whether the mortality rate was closer to 30% or 60%, you recall overhearing the priest mumble once. You don't know what that means. What you do know is that every day, someone you know dies, and every day, you wait to see if it's your turn. At night, the prayers start. Some people scream them into the darkness. Others whisper. You lie in bed, staring at the timber beams, listening for the bell that might ring for your family next. And yet, somehow, sleep comes. It always does. Maybe that's the worst part. Because when you wake, you'll do it all again, with fewer neighbors, fewer options, and a heavier heart. You wake to silence, and for a moment, you let yourself believe it's over. The air is still, the coughing has stopped, and maybe, just maybe, your brother has recovered. He hasn't. He's cold now. Eyes half-lidded, lips cracked, skin the color of wax. You don't scream. You don't even cry. You just sit there, numb, while your mother, who hasn't spoken in 2 days, pulls a threadbare sheet over his face and kisses his brow like he's just gone off to sleep. And then she lies down beside him. That's when you realize you're trapped. Not just emotionally. Physically. You can't leave. You're poor, and escape costs money, money for a horse, for food, for bribes at the city gate. The rich have already gone. They're up in their country villas, eating preserved pears and writing letters about how unfortunate the lower classes are. You're still here. Still breathing the same cursed air. Still stepping over straw soaked in sorrow. You're part of the majority. In medieval Europe, most people never owned land. You're a tenant, maybe even a serf. That means no inheritance, no real rights, and definitely no plan B. The manor lord fled last week, after his steward collapsed mid-prayer. He didn't even stop to tell the village. Just rode off with a trunk full of salted meat and a bottle of rosewater. You considered following. But the roads are dangerous. Not from bandits, though there are plenty now, but from towns that won't let you in. Word spreads fast, and no one wants plague rats in their square. They close the gates, hang signs, and pelt strangers with rocks. Sometimes worse. You've heard whispers of mobs beating travelers to death on sight. So, you stay. You spend your days doing what little you can. Tending a garden that's mostly weeds. Boiling water 3 times before drinking. Clutching a waxy talisman you bought from a wandering friar who claimed it would repel corruption. He also sold a miraculous tooth of St. Bartholomew to 4 other people. You're not sure if it's horse bone, but it smells like it. The rumors fly faster than the pigeons. One man claims bathing spreads the disease. Another swears it's the cats, so they're all being killed. Which, ironically, is great news for the rats. And the fleas. And the plague. You watch a wealthy merchant's carriage roll through town. The driver wears a waxed cloth mask and refuses to stop. Kids run after it, throwing pebbles and shouting names. The merchant throws back a few coins. Not enough to buy bread. Just enough to make them stop yelling. That night, your neighbor's house catches fire. No one helps. No one runs to douse it. The flames light the sky for hours. You watch from your doorway, wrapped in a damp cloak, as their thatch roof crumbles like a pie crust. You can still hear someone screaming inside. No one opens a door. The next day, you pass the charred ruin and see a broken rosary on the ground. You pick it up. It's warm from the ashes. You pocket it anyway. Historians still argue whether the poor were more vulnerable to the plague because of malnutrition, cramped living conditions, or simply being unable to flee, but let's be honest, it's probably all 3. Meanwhile, you're expected to keep working. You try mending a neighbor's fence for half a loaf of bread. You get paid with silence. You can't afford to argue. Arguing means touching, shouting, spitting, things that feel dangerous now. There's talk of quarantine. The word sounds fancy, but what it really means is being locked in your home and left to die, food passed through a slit in the door, if you're lucky. If not, they just nail it shut. Some towns mark doors with red paint. Yours hasn't been marked. Yet. But every morning you check, heart pounding, half expecting to see the scarlet streak by your lintel. You want to run. You dream about it. You imagine slipping into the forest, finding a hermit's cave, surviving on roots and mushrooms. But then you wake to a village elder muttering the Lord's Prayer while dragging a body on a sheet toward the field where they've started digging trenches. He nods at you. You nod back. This is normal now. The worst part? You're starting to get used to it. The bell tolls no longer shock you. The smell of rot only makes you flinch if it's fresh. You're adapting. And that terrifies you more than the plague itself. Because if this is survival, what's left of you when it's over? You never thought you'd be jealous of a man wearing a beak. But there he is, walking stiffly down the muddy street, robes billowing, cane tapping the ground like a nervous metronome. The doctor. Or at least, someone dressed as one. It's hard to tell who's real anymore. He wears a strange mask. Long leather nose stuffed with herbs and dried petals, supposed to protect him from bad air. His eyes are hidden behind round glass lenses, like a bird from a fever dream. You watch him from the shadows, holding your breath like it might help. He doesn't stop. Just keeps moving, cane out like he's herding invisible geese. He pokes a doorway. Waits. Moves on. The irony? His very presence means someone's dying inside. You're told the doctor brings medicine. You're also told he brings death. Both might be true. His treatments vary depending on who you ask. One day it's leeches. Another day, boiled woodlice. One woman claims he gave her husband a drink made from crushed emeralds and ale. He died 4 hours later, whether from the plague or the drink, who knows. You tried asking him once, when your sister showed signs of fever. He didn't speak. Just handed you a folded paper charm with a Latin prayer and walked away. She's dead now. The charm's under your bed. Historians still argue whether these plague doctors helped or just offered false hope. What we know is that their beak masks, so iconic now, weren't universal. Many towns never saw one. But yours did. Lucky you. One of your neighbors insists on treating himself. He's read a manuscript that recommends applying butter and crushed mint to the buboes. Another swears by a paste made of pigeon droppings. You once watched a man press a live chicken to his armpit. The chicken looked just as horrified as you felt. You don't know what's worse, dying of plague, or living long enough to try something like that. There's no hospital here. Monasteries sometimes take in the sick, but they're full, and the monks are dying too. The last one you saw had sunken eyes and was mumbling about the book of Revelation. You didn't go back. Instead, you turned to the local, wise woman. She's old, smells of sage and onions, and wears a pouch of teeth around her neck. She gives you a jar of foul-smelling salve made from bear fat and thyme. You smear it on your chest and hope the bears knew what they were doing. At home, your mother's breathing has grown shallow. You try everything, burning rosemary, tying garlic to the rafters, chanting half-remembered prayers. She stirs once, mutters your name, then goes still. You don't scream. You dig the hole yourself. It's not deep, just enough to keep scavengers away. You mark it with a broken cup and press your forehead to the dirt. You sit there for a long time. Long enough to forget what your own name sounds like in someone else's mouth. Then you go back inside, wash your hands with vinegar, and pretend you're clean. That night, you hear someone knocking on every door down the lane. When they reach yours, you don't move. You just wait. They pause, then move on. You breathe again. The next morning, a new notice is pinned to the church door: any citizen found hiding the sick will be fined or imprisoned. You don't know who wrote it. The priest is gone. The church is locked. The graveyard is full. You begin to notice who's missing. The baker. The blacksmith's wife. Old Tom, who used to sell eels from a barrel. All gone. Their doors hang open now, swinging in the wind. Sometimes you hear cats mewling inside. Sometimes silence. You try to remember what it felt like to live without fear. To eat a meal without checking your throat for swelling first. To hear a cough and not freeze. You dream of sunlight without smoke. Of rivers not choked with ash. Of a sky without crows. You wake to none of it. Because this is the treatment, hope followed by disappointment. Remedies that smell like death. Doctors that look like nightmares. Advice that contradicts itself 3 times before breakfast. And still, somehow, you hold on. You laugh once, when someone tells you drinking wine before noon keeps the plague away. You laugh again when you realize it's the best idea you've heard in weeks. You haven't bathed in weeks. Maybe months. You've lost count. Which is lucky, in a way, because everyone agrees that washing is dangerous now. Bathing opens your pores, they say, lets the sickness seep in. Water carries death. Soap is suspicious. Clean skin is practically an invitation for the plague to waltz in and set up shop. So you stink. But so does everyone else. You do your best. You change your tunic once a week, maybe. Wipe your face with vinegar-dipped cloth. Dust your feet with powdered ash. You tried to rinse your hair in rainwater once, and a neighbor shrieked like you were summoning demons. She crossed herself so fast her elbow popped, then threw a turnip at you for good measure. You never tried it again. The strange part? You start to miss the scent of soap. Lavender. Bay leaves. Even plain old lye. Not that you had much before all this, but now, the air is thick with less pleasant perfumes, burning sulfur, spoiled meat, fear. And underneath it all, the musty, unwashed scent of bodies clinging to life. Good air drives out bad, says your neighbor, who now spends her mornings waving burning sage bundles through her doorway like a priest at a bonfire. You nod politely as she does it. Everyone has their rituals. Hers smells better than most. People wear pomanders now, tiny spheres filled with herbs, hanging from belts or necks like medieval car air fresheners. The wealthy ones have silver orbs filled with ambergris and cinnamon. You've got a dried clove stuck in a bit of cloth. You pretend it works. The street peddlers have adapted fast. A man walks past shouting, perfumed wax. Scented leather masks. Drive out the devil's stink. You once saw someone try to light their pomander to make it extra purifying. They singed off their eyebrows and most of their fringe. No one helped. Everyone just nodded in approval. More fire meant more safety, right? Inside your home, you try your own methods. You hang bundles of mint and sage near the window. You rub your wrists with vinegar and rosewater, which mostly leaves you smelling like a salad someone wept into. It helps a little. Or maybe the placebo effect is stronger than you thought. There's an old superstition about carrying a lump of tar in your pocket. You've got one now. Sticky, awful stuff, but it covers the smell of everything else. You'd laugh, if your throat didn't hurt. Historians still argue whether these so-called plague precautions helped at all or merely provided emotional comfort. Some think burning herbs had a marginal effect on fleas. Others say it was all nonsense, like treating a house fire with scented candles. Still, you're trying. That's all anyone can do. You pass a group of men in the square one afternoon, all stripped to the waist and beating themselves with knotted cords. Flagellants. They chant in Latin between blows, blood running down their backs like paint. Repent. Repent. The end is nigh. A child watches, clutching a piece of bread the size of his fist. He doesn't blink. You've learned not to question things now. If someone wants to whip themselves or bathe in onions or drink snake oil, fine. Just don't ask questions. Don't touch. Don't breathe too deep. You overhear a joke in passing, someone muttering, "You smell like a dead bishop's sock," and you actually chuckle. A small, strange sound. You almost forgot how your own laughter felt. At the edge of town, there's a communal smoke pit where people go to detoxify. You stand there one evening, cloaked in acrid smoke, eyes watering, next to a man who says he was a monk before all this. He's holding a jar of lamp oil and humming to himself. You nod, and he offers you a pinch of burnt thyme. Rub it on your gums, he says. Keeps the rot out. You do. Desperation smells like soot, thyme, and human sweat. The worst part? You start believing it works. Because as the days roll by and more homes go silent, yours doesn't. You're still standing. You're still coughing occasionally, sure, but so far, no black swellings. No bleeding. No final gasps. Maybe it's the vinegar. Or the garlic. Or the paste you smeared on your feet last Tuesday. Maybe it's dumb luck. Or maybe, and here's the terrifying thought, maybe you've just become one of those people who no longer notices how bad things have become. You catch your reflection in a muddy puddle one morning, sunken cheeks, cracked lips, hair like a haystack caught in a storm, and you barely recognize yourself. You used to be someone else. Someone who cared about birthdays and feasts. Someone who once asked a girl to dance at midsummer. Now you care about vinegar. And herbs. And air. You duck back inside, closing the door behind you like it's a fortress. You light a bundle of dried rosemary, hold it beneath your chin, and pretend for one slow breath that you live in a world where clean doesn't mean cursed. You're hungry again. Not just a little hungry, but the gnawing, bone-deep kind. The kind that makes you chew your own sleeve just to feel something in your mouth. There's no bread in the cupboard. No grain in the sack. No root vegetables buried in the floor. Your last onion sprouted weeks ago and went mushy. You scraped the mold off and ate it anyway. That was 3 days ago. So you go out. The market square, once the noisy, beating heart of town, is now a silent shell. A few stalls remain, rickety tables draped with dirty cloth, half-stocked with wilted herbs or bruised apples the size of plums. Prices have tripled, sometimes quadrupled. You used to be able to buy a full basket of food with a few coins. Now you might be able to barter a single egg for a week's labor, or for the ring you swore you'd never part with. You clutch it in your pocket, just in case. A woman is selling salted fish that smells more like despair than dinner. Flies hover in clouds. She eyes you warily, standing behind a row of garlic strings like a saint with a halo of stink. You nod, say nothing, and move on. You can't afford fish, even if you could stomach it. One stall offers what the sign claims is plague-free bread. You don't know what that means. Does it glow when cursed? You step closer. The bread is dark and flat, like something trampled beneath a cartwheel. You hand over 2 buttons and a strip of linen for a quarter loaf. The merchant sniffs the linen and pockets it without a word. Back home, you eat the bread slowly, picking at it like a crow. It's dense, sour, and might be partly sawdust. You don't care. You chew it into a paste and pretend it's warm cheese. A rat runs across the floor. You don't flinch. The next day, you help dig a trench for the dead. Not because anyone asked, but because the gravedigger collapsed in the mud and no one else stepped forward. The labor earns you a half scoop of barley and a stringy carrot that looks like it died before it was picked. You boil both in a cracked pot until the water turns gray, then sip it like it's a royal stew. Historians still argue whether food shortages were caused more by panic, by actual scarcity, or by logistical breakdowns, but in your world, none of that matters. The food is gone. The fields lie untended. Farmers are dead or dying. Supply lines have snapped like rotten rope. You dream of fruit. Ripe pears. Sweet dates. The tang of wine-soaked figs. You wake with your mouth watering and the taste of ashes on your tongue. Some folks try foraging. Wild onions. Nettles. Mushrooms if they're brave. A boy down the street boiled pine bark into a mush and called it pudding. He died a day later, might have been the plague. Might have been the pudding. You think about your old neighbor, a cobbler who used to give your siblings honey scraps when they passed his shop. His window is boarded now. The smell from his cellar makes you wonder if the honey's still in there, and if you're desperate enough to go find out. You are. But not yet. Meanwhile, the city council posts a decree: hoarding food is punishable by death. As if anyone has enough to hoard. Another decree follows 2 days later: all grain must be turned in for fair redistribution. You laugh at that one. No one shows up. The people who might have obeyed are already buried. In your own home, you start watching your neighbors smoke again. Not because it smells nice, but because it means she's cooking. You consider visiting, asking if she'll trade for a task. Chopping wood. Fetching water. Holding a candle while she chants to her garlic string. Instead, you chew a strip of boiled leather from an old boot. You close your eyes, tell yourself it's beef, and let your jaw do the lying. Every day that you don't starve feels like a small, twisted miracle. And every day you wake with the same thought: if I make it through today, maybe the world will remember what full feels like. MES at dusk. Just one. Soft. You freeze. No one knocks anymore, unless they're desperate or delivering bad news. You creep to the door, press your ear to the wood. Nothing. Then another knock. This time weaker. You crack the door. Outside, a child stands barefoot in the dust. Her eyes are wide, hollow, and wrong. She opens her mouth to speak, but only a wheeze comes out. Her nose is bleeding. You step back instinctively. By morning, she's gone. A neighbor says he saw someone carry her body toward the trenches. You say nothing. You just nod. And you don't sleep again that night. They're dying faster now. One by one, quietly, like candles blown out in a row. You stop counting. Counting implies a pattern, a rhythm, a reason. This isn't that. This is chaos. A cruel roll of the dice that never seems to land in your favor. The town smells like death. Not metaphorically, literally. The air has turned metallic and sour, like spoiled wine and rotting wood. You taste it when you breathe. The smell clings to your clothes. It sits behind your eyes. And everywhere, there are bodies. At first, people buried their dead carefully. With prayers, with tears, with sprigs of rosemary placed gently on still chests. Now they dig fast. Or not at all. Some are wrapped in blankets and left on doorsteps. Others are dumped into pits with no names, no markers, no ceremony. You helped carry a body for the first time this week. A man from 3 houses down. You didn't know him well, only that he used to hum while he swept his doorstep. The hum is gone now. So are his teeth. You tie a cloth around your mouth, not because it helps, but because it makes you feel less exposed. The grave pit is already half full. A priest stands nearby, saying a prayer so quickly it sounds like babble. He blesses the air more than the bodies. You wonder if he's even looking. Later that day, someone you know, really know, collapses. Your friend Tomas, the one who used to carve little animals from scrap wood. He's got buboes under his arms. You see them. He doesn't hide them. He just looks at you and says, "It's time." You help him walk to the edge of town, where the sick gather. A makeshift isolation field. Just a muddy meadow with some tents, a few crosses hammered into the ground, and a line of crows watching from the trees. Tomas sits down on the grass. He hands you a carved rabbit. "Take it," he says. "For luck." You want to argue. Instead, you nod and back away. You don't look back. That night, someone leaves bread on your doorstep. A small loaf. Warm. You don't know who did it. You tear it in half anyway and leave the rest where you found it. The next morning, it's gone. A silent thank you, traded between ghosts. Historians still argue whether cities suffered more than rural villages, but you don't need an argument. You live it. The close air. The packed homes. The way screams echo off stone like they're multiplying. Sometimes, when it rains, the mud runs red from the burial pits. One afternoon, you see someone hauling bodies in a cart. He's using a broken chair leg to push them into place. You recognize one. She used to sing outside the church. You feel your knees weaken, but you don't cry. You haven't cried in days. Maybe weeks. You just keep walking. You pass two men dragging a corpse by the wrists, talking about dinner plans. You hear a boy ask his father if they can eat the dog. The father doesn't answer. A woman screams from a second-story window. No one looks up. You've learned to look down. To keep your head low. Your breath shallow. Your thoughts short. There's no privacy in grief anymore. No space for mourning. Just silence. Just the work of staying alive while everyone around you disappears. The town used to feel full. Now it feels haunted. And the worst part is, you're still here. You should feel lucky. That's what people say when they see you now, if they say anything at all. If they even look. Survivors are rare, but not always celebrated. You expected cheering, maybe. Gratitude. But what you get is suspicion. People cross themselves when you pass. Mothers pull children behind skirts. A boy throws a clod of dirt at you and runs away. A man mutters something about devils and shadows. You laugh bitterly and keep walking. Your house has turned quiet, heavy. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums. Everyone who lived here is gone. You sweep the same floorboards every morning, even though there's no one left to track in mud. It's just habit. A routine to keep your mind from tipping sideways. You leave the door open, hoping for a breeze. Or maybe hoping someone might wander in and talk to you like you're still human. They don't. Even the rats seem to avoid you. Your friend, well, former friend, Marjorie saw you in the market and turned around without a word. She clutched her prayer beads so hard you thought they'd snap. You tried to follow, but her husband stepped between you and shook his head. No words, just a look like you'd spit on his bread. You're marked now, in a way no priest can see. A living reminder of death. A breathing question with no answer. They think you're cursed. Or protected by something unnatural. Or maybe you just brought it and never suffered the consequence. It's not personal. They treat all survivors like that. One man told you he dreamed that the plague whispered your name. Another said he saw you walking during the night, even though you were asleep. A third just asked, quietly, nervously, why you were still alive when his wife wasn't. You didn't know what to say. You still don't. Historians still argue whether plague survivors developed a social stigma or were revered for their endurance. It probably varied. But in your town, you're more ghost than miracle. More question than comfort. There's a new priest now. A young one, wide-eyed, red-cheeked. Sent by the bishop to restore the spirit of the people. He gives sermons from behind a wall of incense, and his hands tremble whenever someone coughs. He sees you one day, seated alone in the back pew, hood up, hands folded, and smiles nervously. After the service, he tries to speak to you. Asks how you're holding up. Offers a prayer. You nod politely, but don't speak. You're not ready. Not for that. Later, you find a small loaf and a candle left by your door. You suspect it was him. You try to pray that night. The words don't come easily. You sit in the dark with the candle lit, listening to your breath echo off the empty walls. You whisper the names of those who died. Not in order. Just as they rise. Some names bring faces. Others bring scents, laughter, lullabies. You try not to think about the ones you can't remember anymore. The town begins to move on, in small, strange ways. A few market stalls reopen. Children play again, quieter, with watchful eyes. A distant bell tolls, but just once. For a wedding, not a death. You watch it all from your doorstep, a silent observer with empty hands and a full heart. No one invites you to anything. No one asks how you are. But they stop throwing things, at least. Your clothes hang loose. You haven't eaten well in weeks. Your eyes sting when the sun hits them. You've started talking to yourself just to hear a voice. One morning, someone finally speaks to you without flinching. A little girl with tangled hair and a runny nose. She holds out a fistful of daisies and says, "You look lonely." You almost cry. Instead, you take the flowers and say, "I am." She sits beside you and starts humming a tune you haven't heard in months. Something about a miller and a goose. It's tuneless and strange, but it's music. And that's enough. The next day, someone else nods at you in passing. A man. Then a woman offers you an apple. And slowly, like moss growing back after fire, life begins to wrap around your edges. You're still marked. You always will be. But now, maybe that mark means you endured. It's Sunday, and the church bell rings again, soft, slow, as if even it is tired. You go anyway. You always do now. Not for comfort. Not really. More for the rhythm of it. The sitting. The standing. The way prayers stretch time like warm wax. Inside, the pews are half full. That's considered a crowd these days. The young priest speaks of God's mercy, of punishment, of divine purpose. He says the plague was sent to cleanse. To purify. He says the faithful will be rewarded and the wicked judged. You glance around at the rows of hollow-eyed survivors, many of whom gave their last bread crusts to the dying, buried their neighbors with bare hands, sang lullabies to children they barely knew. If this is punishment, you think, God's got a cruel sense of humor. But you stay seated. You stay quiet. Because what else is there? The church has more power now than ever. The nobles ran. The officials fled. But the priests stayed, or at least some of them. They blessed the dead, lit candles, muttered Latin phrases into the stink of death. That earned them something. Fear, maybe. Reverence, too. They've become the storytellers of survival. And they're rewriting the narrative. You hear it everywhere now. From pulpits. From roadside preachers. From parchment nailed to doors. The plague came because we sinned. God saw our pride, our gluttony, our greed. Repent, and the next wave might spare us. You see children forced to kneel for hours in the square, reciting prayers until they faint. A man whips himself bloody every Friday to cleanse his soul. A woman drags herself up the cathedral steps on her knees, whispering the names of every person she lost. And you? You sit with your grief folded neatly in your lap. You know sin had nothing to do with it. Rats don't care if you lie. Fleas don't ask if you've been to confession. But doubt is a dangerous thing now. You remember Marjorie, the one who once avoided you in the market? Last week, her youngest daughter died in the night. They buried her behind the house. 2 days later, a friar came and told Marjorie it happened because she had not fasted properly during Lent. She believed him. You saw her burning all her family's stored food in the street that same evening. People need reasons. And the church provides them, neatly, confidently, with embossed lettering and gold leaf borders. Historians still argue whether the church's influence grew or shrank after the plague. It depends where you look. Some towns turned to faith with desperate fervor. Others watched their priests die and lost all trust. But here, in your village, the church has become the only constant. A few heretics were burned last week. You didn't see it, but you heard about it. One of them claimed the plague was not divine punishment but a natural rot of the world. Another said that if God loved his people, he'd have warned them. They were dragged into the square and tied to stakes before sunrise. The fire smelled like old wax and hair. You keep your thoughts to yourself. Instead, you light a candle each morning, as instructed. You kneel, even though your knees are raw. You whisper the new prayers. You even pay a coin, your last, for a scrap of parchment stamped with Saint Sebastian's image. He's popular now. Arrows in his body, eyes turned to heaven. A holy survivor. You pin the parchment above your bed. The new priest starts visiting homes. He blesses thresholds, sprinkles ash, leaves bits of palm frond under pillows. He asks questions in a soft voice. Have you sinned? Have you doubted? Do you seek forgiveness? You answer yes to all of them. One night, you hear singing in the distance. A funeral hymn. You follow the sound to a field lit by torchlight. A group has gathered, not for a burial, but for penance. They're dressed in white, barefoot, moving in circles, humming until the stars blur. You watch from the shadows, unsure whether to join in or run. It's hard to know who's truly grieving and who's just afraid of being accused of not grieving enough. Even laughter feels dangerous now. You heard a boy giggle at a joke about fleas, and his mother slapped him before he could finish. You miss joy. You miss doubt. You miss freedom of thought, being able to wonder out loud without someone writing your name on a list. Still, in private, you think, maybe the plague wasn't about sin. Maybe it was just, the world being cruel and random and alive. And you whisper it only once, into the corner of your mattress, so even the candle won't hear. You thought things would feel different after surviving. That some part of the sky might open up. That you'd wake one day with clarity or purpose. That maybe, just maybe, you'd be treated like someone valuable. But instead, people eye you like you're made of smoke. A walking reminder of everything that didn't make it. You carry it in your body. A shoulder that aches every time it rains. A cough that never quite left. Dreams that twist themselves into knots. And, of course, the look people give you when they hear you survived that house, that family, that street. They whisper, but they don't mean to be cruel. It's just that survivors make people uncomfortable. You're proof that life goes on, but also that it doesn't go on fairly. You try to get work again. Back in the fields, where you once spent long hours bending under the sun. But now there's a new system. Landowners have died, left properties untended. Entire manors are empty. The peasants who remain, like you, suddenly find themselves in high demand. That should be good news, right? It is, until the nobles notice. See, in the plague's aftermath, peasants like you start asking for higher wages. Food. Protection. Maybe even a day off now and then. The surviving landlords, scattered, shaken, desperate, agree. For a while, at least. But change has a curfew. And the ruling class doesn't enjoy sharing power. So, the crown steps in. The ordinance of laborers, they call it. Fancy name for. You're not allowed to demand more. It sets wages back to pre-plague levels. Says you have to work for the same rate you did before half the workforce died screaming into their own pillows. If you refuse, you're a criminal. You could be fined. Or jailed. Or worse, branded. You blink at the decree nailed to the town gate. It's in Latin, of course. But the gist trickles down fast. Everyone knows what it means. You still go to the fields. But now with a mix of resentment and fear. The landowner's son, who used to ignore you completely, now struts between rows of barley with a whip and a smirk. And here's the cruelest part, the plague made labor valuable. But law made laborers disposable again. Historians still argue whether the Black Death helped end feudalism or simply reshaped it. Some call it the death rattle of the old world. Others say it just swapped one set of chains for another. You're not sure. You just know your back still hurts and your stomach still growls. You hear of villages banding together, refusing to work until wages rise. Some succeed. Others are crushed like ants beneath a boot. There's talk of revolt. Angry songs hummed under breath. Messages carved into bread crusts, passed hand to hand. It feels dangerous. It feels hopeful. But you're tired. You've buried too many dreams already. You nod when you're supposed to. Keep your head down. Let others lead, if they dare. At market, a man named Wulfric, no teeth, one eye, tells you he's liberated a few chickens from an abandoned estate. He laughs at his own word choice. Liberated, he snorts. Like I'm a lord with a sword. You chuckle, carefully. Wulfric's a known hothead. But also brave. You buy a chicken from him anyway, and name it Justice. Just to amuse yourself. You sleep with it tucked under your cloak, because thieves are bold these days. Meanwhile, the rich start building walls. Actual ones, around estates. New taxes are invented. Laws multiply like fleas. You hear of a boy hanged for stealing a loaf. Another imprisoned for wandering idly without service. That could have been you. You begin to realize something terrible: survival doesn't make you lucky. It makes you useful. And that's not the same thing. Still, you plant your little garden. You mend a fence. You feed Justice corn kernels one by one, like some royal pet. And each night, you listen for rumors. Of rebellion. Of reform. Of something breaking loose. Because you've been silent for too long. And if this world wants to chain you down again, it better hold on tight. They say time heals everything. But time, as it turns out, also forgets. And forgetting, now that hurts more than anything else. You walk through your village and see rebuilt homes, laughter returning to doorsteps, couples strolling with children who were born after. After the moaning carts, after the black spotted skin, after the ash and the prayers and the smell of lye in every crevice. These new children don't flinch at the sound of coughing. They don't instinctively count every rat. They've never stared at a parent with glassy eyes, waiting to see if this would be the last breath. To them, the plague is already a story. And you're becoming part of the scenery. The odd uncle. The quiet neighbor with a 1,000-yard stare and a limp that won't go away. You sit outside your hut, warming your hands over a shallow brazier, and listen. People talk about good harvests. About weddings and tithes and how Father Anselm's goat gave birth to twins. Again. No one talks about 1348 anymore. Except you. And the crows. So you begin keeping little records. Not written, parchment is still too dear, but carved. On wood. Stone. Whatever you can find. You notch the names of those who died. You scratch their likenesses into bark with dull knives. Not artistically, just enough to remember the way Matilda's braid always curled behind her left ear. Or how old Edric's left boot was always missing a lace. It's not history, exactly. But it's yours. Meanwhile, real history gets written elsewhere. In monasteries. In London. By people who watched from behind thick stone walls and called it all a divine correction. A few even smile. You nearly cry. You rebuild in other ways too. A neighbor teaches you how to mend shoes. You trade him onions for beeswax. You spend an entire afternoon learning to catch rainwater in a barrel without it going stagnant. You fix the fence. You dig a better latrine. You think about planting herbs, maybe chamomile. There's something oddly satisfying in watching things grow again. You don't talk much about the early days, not because you've forgotten, but because the memories arrive sharp, uninvited. The moan of someone dying in the next room. The sound of the dirt hitting a coffin lid. The way your hands shook for weeks, even after you stopped being afraid. Still, you carry those days with you. Tucked deep in your ribs. They've changed the way you walk. The way you listen. The way you wait a moment longer before answering, like you're checking whether the words you're about to say matter. Once, you thought survival was the end of the story. Now, you're learning. It's only the beginning. You wake up to birdsong. Real birdsong, not the croaking cause of the graveyard crows, but high, fluting notes from a thrush nesting in the ruined chapel's eaves. The sound startles you at first. For months, mornings meant silence or weeping. Or worse, the frantic rustle of someone packing to flee. But now, for once, it's just birds. The sky is already bright. You overslept, and no one minds. There's no overseer cracking a whip. No tolling bell demanding mass attendance. Just the quiet hum of a village finding its way back to life. You pull on your tunic, patched again, but clean, and step outside. The earth smells warm, thick with summer rot and wild mint. Someone's lighting a cooking fire. Someone else is arguing gently over whose goat chewed the laundry. It's normal. Not quite the normal you remember, but a new kind that doesn't threaten to snap under the weight of grief. There's a widow down the road, Marjorie, who's taken to baking bread for anyone who brings her flour. She swears her oven survived the plague better than any priest, and she might be right. You offer to gather wood. She smiles, missing 3 teeth, and hands you a bundle of kindling to carry. It's small, this moment. Utterly forgettable. But you clutch it anyway. Because you remember the opposite. You remember the months when the village square was filled with pyres. When dogs roamed wild, and the silence screamed louder than any church bell. When the only smell was rot, and the only music was coughing. And now. There are children again. Tiny, rag-wrapped beings wobbling after chickens, chasing dust motes, giggling like nothing ever happened. Some of them are plague babies, born to women who didn't expect to survive childbirth, let alone raise a child afterward. Others are orphans adopted by strangers with empty arms and more kindness than sense. They run without fear. They don't know to be afraid yet. Historians still argue whether medieval society ever truly healed after the Black Death. Some say the trauma was too great, that it fundamentally broke the population's faith, its feudal structure, its collective spirit. Others believe it led to rebirth, more mobility, more wages, more awareness that life could, perhaps, be more than toil and obedience. But that's a debate for scholars. You only know your own body, tired, still aching in the joints, but alive. And growing used to the taste of survival. A traveling friar arrives one evening, thin as a rake, but full of stories. He speaks Latin and Flemish and a few curses in Italian. He's collecting tales, he says, not alms. Everyone laughs when he calls himself a witness to God's plague tour. He sleeps in the abandoned mill and sings songs at dusk, half sacred, half nonsense. You listen to him talk about other villages. Some fared better. Some didn't make it. Some rose from the ashes with banners and bartering rights. Others vanished entirely, leaving only ghost names and cracked stone walls. You try to imagine your own village from the outside, how strange and small it must look, limping back to life. You wonder, often, why you survived. It wasn't your herbs. Or prayers. Or vinegar. You did all the same desperate rituals as everyone else. You whispered charms. Tied feathers to your belt. Swallowed sour-smelling tonics. And yet somehow, you stayed upright while others collapsed. There's no answer. Only air in your lungs and mud under your nails. Only the dull realization that no one is coming to fix the world for you, you'll have to do it yourself. So you keep moving. You help rebuild the chapel roof. You patch someone's cart axle. You learn to brew weak beer that doesn't make people go blind. You teach a half-dozen children how to dig a latrine that won't collapse. No one declares you a hero. But no one ignores you either. You're not the same person you were before the sickness. You're slower. More cautious. But also braver in strange, subtle ways. You speak up more. You ask questions. You laugh when someone makes a joke, even if it's terrible. And you cry, sometimes, when no one's looking, mostly from gratitude. Or exhaustion. Or both. And every evening, as the light fades and the fires crackle, you lie on your straw-stuffed mattress and listen, to the wind. To the soft creak of wood. To the gentle stirrings of life moving forward. It isn't easy. It never was. But now, at least, it's yours. The night deepens now, and your breathing slows. The world of soot and sweat, of morning bells and soot-choked alleys, fades softly behind your closed eyelids. The aching weight of survival begins to lift, like a heavy blanket shrugged off at last. You've walked far tonight, through emptied towns and sun-warmed fields, past weeping windows and overgrown paths. You've listened to the silence that comes after too much grief, and the laughter that eventually follows, tentative but real. Now, let your thoughts grow soft around the edges. Let the memory of warm bread and birdsong settle across your chest like the gentlest touch. Let the rhythm of peasant footsteps, of lutes out of tune and goats that won't stay tethered, carry you further into rest. The echoes of that time, strange and distant, become fainter with every breath. You're safe here, in your own time, your own bed, your own night. Whatever haunts you doesn't define you. Whatever you've lost has carved space for gentler things. You are more than what you've endured. So ease down deeper now. Breathe slower. You've made it through plague and fire, fear and hunger, not just alive, but whole enough to dream again. And that's a kind of miracle. Sleep, now. Let the winds of history quiet. Let the dust settle. Let the silence hold you like a soft cradle. You've earned it. One monk writes that the plague was a punishment for greed. Another claims it was sent to test the faithful. Historians still argue whether it was spread by sailors, fleas, or the wrath of celestial bodies, but very few of them mention the woman you saw wrap her baby in rosemary sprigs and set it in the river. The truth is, no one wants to hear your version. Because your version smells like fear. Like waste. Like cracked fingers and broken hymns and everything that didn't get sanitized by memory. You meet another survivor, Maud, from the next village over. She's missing 3 fingers and most of her teeth, but her eyes are sharp as needles. She nods when you talk about dreams. The kind where the dead climb back out of the earth, not to haunt you, but to ask why you're still here. Maud carries a sack of dolls she made from rag scraps. She gives them to children, even if they laugh. Especially if they laugh. You gotta leave something, she says, or we vanish for good. So now, when you carve your little notches into fence posts or abandoned doorframes, you whisper a name. And Maud, if she passes by later, leaves a doll at its base. Sometimes with a flower. Once with half a carrot. It becomes a quiet ritual. No one talks about it, but people notice. The younger ones stop to touch the carvings. Ask questions. Try to pronounce old names out loud. You still hear sneers sometimes, ghoul, they call you, or relic. But fewer than before. Because in the end, every village needs someone to remember the hard parts. The uncomfortable ones. The parts too jagged to wrap in parchment and call history. You're not sure what this makes you. A chronicler? A crank? Just someone who lived long enough to need remembering? Maybe it doesn't matter. You keep carving. One day, a traveling friar stops to ask if you know how many died here. You point him toward the fence. He squints at your tally, your uneven marks, your worn wood. He doesn't say, "Thank you." He just copies it down and walks away. But that night, someone leaves you a candle. And the wind, so often cruel, passes without knocking anything over. You sleep a little easier. Not because the world is fixed, but because you're slowly becoming part of what holds it together. At first, there's no work at all. Not because you're lazy, heavens no. It's just that no one needs a thatcher when the rooftops are quiet and the people underneath are too dead to notice the rain. The mill doesn't grind because no one's harvesting. The shoemaker's gone. The baker's vanished. Even the Lord Steward stopped demanding taxes, mostly because the steward himself keeled over behind his ledger, face buried in a stale heel of bread. You sit on a log with calloused hands and too much time, staring at the overgrown path that used to bustle with carts and gossip. For a while, it feels like the world has stopped turning. But then, slowly, things creak back to life. The survivors. Thin, wary, and blinking like moles dragged into sunlight, begin crawling out from wherever they waited. Someone decides to replant. Someone else manages to trap a few rabbits. A blacksmith's son remembers how to shoe a mule. Even you, sleepy with boredom, find yourself pulled into someone's desperate project. It starts with a cartwheel. Then a roof beam. Then a fence. By week's end, you're building chicken coops for 3 families and shoveling out an old pigpen no one's touched since the bad year. And here's the funny thing, now that so many people are dead, your labor is suddenly valuable. It's a weird feeling. You've never been the type to haggle, peasants don't haggle, they obey, but now people actually offer you things. A flask of cider. An egg. Even coin. You joke once that your feet are worth their weight in silver. No one laughs. Because honestly, they might be. Wages rise. Land becomes available. Lords, desperate to keep peasants from fleeing, offer absurd deals, half the harvest, rights to firewood, even one village that literally handed over the manor house because nobody else wanted to maintain it. You don't exactly become rich. But you eat more meat. Your tunic fits a bit better now. Not because you've grown, but because it isn't stitched from scraps. You sleep on straw that's been properly aired, not clumped damp in a corner. You even start dreaming again, sometimes of things that never happened. There's a feeling in the air, hard to name. Possibility. Power. Revenge. Some call it the Great Turning. Others call it God's grace. Historians still argue whether it was the beginning of the end for feudalism, or just a blip in the mud-soaked timeline of peasant misery. Either way, things are shifting. You hear about laborers' guilds forming, groups of workers banding together to demand fair pay and better food. Even in tiny villages like yours, people begin grumbling when a lord tries to underpay them. Last year, that grumble would have earned you a whipping. This year, the Lord apologizes and throws in a dried sausage. But of course, it can't last. Soon enough, Parliament catches wind of all this cheeky independence and does what governments always do when the poor start doing well, they panic. New laws spring up. The Statute of Laborers tries to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Moving to find better work is suddenly illegal. Refusing a job. A punishable offense. Unlawful assembly becomes a favorite phrase, especially if 5 peasants gather to talk wages. Still, they can't watch everyone. So the work keeps coming. Fields need plowing. Walls need mending. There are so few skilled hands left that you're now the village thatcher, fence wright, ditch filler, and reluctant pig castrator. Somehow, you're both exhausted and essential. And weirdly, you're proud. You pass the ruins of old cottages, homes whose owners never came back, and feel something like a heartbeat in your chest. You remember them. But you're also building something new. Something stubborn and strange and patched together from grief and manure and old habits that no longer quite fit. One day, a boy approaches you while you're mending a gate. He says, "You're the one who fixed our chimney." You nod. "Probably." He says, "Mom said if it weren't for you, we'd have frozen." You don't know what to say, so you hand him a bent nail and tell him to keep it in case he needs to scare off ghosts. He takes it very seriously. Later that night, sitting by your fire, you think about that boy. About all the people quietly watching you put the world back together with splinters and sweat. You may not have chosen this role, but you're in it now. And in a time when so many things feel lost or cursed, you become something almost miraculous. Reliable. You don't mean to become superstitious, it just sort of happens. At first, it's harmless. A little knock on wood when you pass the old barn where half a family died. A muttered charm under your breath when a dog howls in the middle of the night. You stop stepping on cracks. You start hanging sprigs of herbs above the door. Maybe it's rosemary. Maybe it's something else. Honestly, you're not sure anymore, but the neighbor swears it keeps away spirits. And the spirits are everywhere now. You see them in fog. In the smudge on the hearthstone. In dreams that leave you sweaty and breathless, clutching at nothing. You know it's probably just your mind trying to make sense of the losses, but when your cousin wakes up screaming 3 nights in a row because the dead are sitting on her chest, you start sleeping with a candle lit. You tell yourself it's silly. You've never been one for ghost stories. You're a thatcher, a worker, a survivor. But then your best friend's ox keels over without warning, and they find his boots facing backward. That's a sign. Or maybe a warning. You don't even know anymore, you just know everyone is acting a little odd these days. Because surviving the plague doesn't mean you've escaped it. There's a heaviness in your bones, like the world is permanently off balance. People talk about a sickness of the soul, a kind of sadness that sticks. Some call it melancholia. Others call it God's whisper. Historians still argue whether this mass grief reshaped culture or simply settled into the background noise of survival. You wake often in the middle of the night, certain something is watching you. You start walking the long way around the crossroads, the short path is too quiet. You avoid mirrors after sunset. You bury iron nails at the 4 corners of your home. None of this feels strange anymore. The priests tell you to put your faith in God. The herbal women whisper other things, older things, things with teeth and moss and names no one writes down. One of them teaches you a charm made of 3 knots and a strand of your own hair. You carry it like a coin. And then there are the dreams. Not every night. Just the bad ones. You're back in the churchyard, digging again. But this time, the bodies speak. They tell you their names. They ask why you survived. You try to answer, but your mouth fills with dirt. You wake up gasping, hand clenched around your shirt, nails digging into your palm. You're not alone in this, not really. Everyone has their own rituals now. One man refuses to wear shoes, says the spirits can't follow you if your soles touch earth. A widow wears only black, even 2 years after her loss. A boy in the next village won't go indoors at all. He lives under a wagon and eats nothing but garlic and dry beans. Fear makes people odd. But you're still functional, still quietly holding it together with spit and stubbornness. Most days. You joke with the baker again. You barter with the tanner. You join a few neighbors in rebuilding the chapel roof, even though none of you feel like singing hymns just yet. And here's something odd, in the middle of all this superstition, a strange sort of science begins to creep in. Someone brings word from the university in Oxford, there are scholars debating whether bad air causes illness, what they call miasma. Others say the alignment of planets is to blame. Some even suggest invisible seeds might be floating around, infecting people. You scratch your head and mutter that maybe it's all of the above. Or none of it. You just know you don't want to be buried in a mass pit, and you'll eat a raw onion if it keeps the plague at bay. Still, something shifts in you. You start collecting signs. Not reading them like a priest reads scripture, just noticing. A red moon. A crow perched on your fence for too long. Milk that curdles before morning. You don't panic. You just pay attention. After all, you've learned the hard way that the world is full of invisible teeth. If you're lucky, maybe you can learn to see their shadows before they bite. A new baby is born in the village, tiny, squirmy, and already howling like he knows what's coming. Everyone crowds around the door, touching wood, whispering blessings, tying twine around the threshold. You watch all this and don't laugh, not even a little. Because part of you believes it works. Maybe the charms don't keep away death. Maybe the prayers don't sway the heavens. But they keep your hands busy, your mind focused, your heart just soft enough to keep caring. And in a world stitched together by fear, that might be the only kind of magic that matters anymore. You check your own doorway that night, make sure the rosemary hasn't wilted. Make sure the nail is still buried. Just in case. You were never particularly religious, not in the grand, Latin chanting, incense burning, relic kissing kind of way. You went to mass, you bowed when you were supposed to, you crossed yourself automatically when passing a shrine. But after the plague, faith becomes stranger. Your neighbors start seeing signs everywhere. A bleeding turnip. A cloud shaped like a lamb. A flicker of candlelight that refuses to stay lit. Some kneel in the street in the middle of the night, praying loudly enough to wake the dogs. Others go quiet, like they're trying not to draw God's attention at all. After all, it's not clear whether he's in a forgiving mood. You're caught somewhere in between. The church survived, sort of. The priest did not, he collapsed mid-sermon one Sunday, mid-word, as if God had reached down and pinched out the wick of his soul. Now a younger, sterner man has taken his place. He preaches about wrath and judgment, about how the plague was earned through sin. Too much dancing, too much gossip, too much wine. You notice he conveniently ignores that the nuns died, too. And they weren't exactly hosting wild banquets. You attend services now and then, but they feel different. More somber. Less hopeful. Still, the rituals are comforting. The way the chants echo off the stone walls. The steady rhythm of kneeling, standing, murmuring. There's something soothing in the repetition, like you're brushing the same path through tall grass every week, hoping it leads somewhere holy. Somewhere clean. But outside the church walls, faith wears other clothes. There's a group of flagellants that passes through your village, men and women walking barefoot, backs flayed raw, chanting in broken Latin as they whip themselves. They say their pain will atone for all of us. That their blood will turn God's gaze away from the earth. Some villagers join them. Others throw old onions. You just stare, trying to decide whether they're brave or broken. Historians still argue whether the church's authority truly cracked after the plague, or if people simply started looking sideways for comfort, toward charms, folk healers, whispered prayers in kitchens instead of cathedrals. What you know is that belief has become slippery. Less about doctrine, more about survival. You catch yourself praying in odd moments now. Not in Latin. Not even out loud. Just quick, desperate thoughts tossed like stones into a deep well. Please let this cough pass. Please let the baby sleep through the night. Please not this one, not again. You bargain with the invisible. Promise to light a candle. To stop swearing. To never lie again if only your sister's fever breaks. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. The candle burns either way. The traveling friars have a theory, the plague was a test. A sorting of souls. Only the righteous were spared. You try not to laugh when they say that, thinking of the kindly old couple who fed the poor and still died within hours of each other. Meanwhile, the village drunk sleeps off another bender under a cart and hasn't sneezed once. Righteousness, it seems, is a poor predictor of survival. You meet a woman named Gisela, older than you, but quick-witted, with a sharp nose and sharper tongue. She doesn't go to church. She keeps bees, burns strange-smelling herbs, and knows exactly how many bones are in a chicken. People call her a healer when she helps, a witch when she doesn't. She teaches you how to make a poultice for coughs. You teach her how to fix a thatch roof. One day she tells you that faith doesn't live in churches. It lives in hands. In choices. In who you feed and who you mourn. You nod, not because you fully understand, but because it sounds like something you want to be true. A pilgrim arrives one evening, cloaked in dust and grime. He's walked hundreds of miles to a shrine that may no longer exist, barefoot the whole way. His feet are ruined, but his eyes burn with something fierce. Hope, maybe. Or delusion. It's hard to tell the difference lately. You give him bread. He blesses you. You both pretend it means something. You start keeping a journal, nothing fancy, just charcoal on scrap. Little notes about the weather. The dreams you've had. The names of the dead, because someone should remember. It feels holy in a quiet, secret way. Like carving prayers into stone, one letter at a time. Faith, you realize, doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it's just the decision to keep going. To rise each morning, sweep the hearth, bake the bread, light the candle, even when no one's watching. Even when the wind sounds like a warning and the sky hangs heavy over the fields. Maybe that's all the prayer you really need. You used to think time was solid. Dependable. Days stacked neatly like firewood, Sunday for rest, Monday for work, Wednesday halfway through the week. But after the plague, time goes soft. Mushy around the edges. It sloshes and stretches, then snaps tight when you least expect it. One moment, it's been a year since your brother died. The next, you're hearing his laugh like he's standing right behind you. You try to keep track. You scratch marks into wood beams. Tie knots in string. But the seasons don't behave anymore. Crops bloom late. Snow arrives early. The sun rises as if uncertain it should bother. You blink, and it's midsummer. You cough, and suddenly it's Lent. Historians still argue whether the disintegration of rigid feudal systems began during the plague years or in their long echo. But you don't need a scholar to tell you the old order's fraying. When half the village lies beneath the earth, hierarchy loses some of its polish. Your landlord used to ride through on a polished gelding, boots shiny as apple skins. Now his son comes on foot, hat in hand, asking politely if you'll stay on the land another season. He even offers pay. Real coin, not just vague promises of protection and grain. Turns out, fewer peasants means more bargaining power. You're not quite bold enough to celebrate. But in private, when no one's looking, you allow yourself a smirk. Once, people like you were stuck where they were born, planted like trees, told to grow obediently toward the sky. Now, you know someone who left. Just walked off one morning, found work 3 villages over, and no one stopped him. No constable chased him. No lord demanded a fine. Freedom is a weed, creeping in through the cracks. You get letters now and then, clumsy, misspelled, barely legible, from people you thought you'd never hear from again. Cousins, neighbors, friends. All moving, trading, marrying, starting strange new lives. It's dizzying. And a little exhilarating. Some days, you almost feel guilty for surviving. Like you've inherited a world reshaped by death, and now you're expected to build something out of the rubble. It's not that you're ungrateful. It's just, exhausting. The survivors all carry it differently. Some grow sharper, harder. Hoard food. Snap at laughter. Others get softer, too soft, flinching at every cough, eyes wide with the memory of all that loss. And a few pretend nothing happened at all. They sweep out the chapel. They polish the manor windows. They talk about the next harvest like nothing ever interrupted the rhythm. You watch them and wonder, are they pretending for your sake, or theirs? There's a superstition growing that the plague will come back. That it's not done with us. People whisper of rats in port towns again. Of a merchant who coughed blood in a southern inn. You pretend not to hear. But every time a stranger sneezes, your heart tightens like a fist. You've become a little superstitious yourself. You leave offerings of bread for the spirits of the dead, quietly, behind the barn. You thank the sky when it rains. You never speak ill of the crows, just in case they're listening. You listen closely to dreams now, especially the ones where your mother visits, younger than you remember her, humming the song she used to sing while darning socks. You try to rebuild. The market reopens, smaller, quieter, but full of smells you'd almost forgotten. Cinnamon. Pickled onions. Tanned leather. You buy a clay cup with a chip in the rim. You don't need it. But it feels hopeful. Like proof that someone, somewhere, is still making things. A girl plays a tune on a bone flute. It's off-key, and half the melody's missing, but people stop to listen.